and should be going live.
Yeah, you want to pull up the YouTube? Seth Tower Hurd, welcome to the
Thank you.
podcast. So, you are a writer on Substack, or at least this is how you've come across my scope. For anybody that doesn't know, what is Substack and why do people write there?
So it is the place where I would say some of the most...
Ben, turn the sound on there on mute. All right.
Pick up there?
Well, yeah. We haven't done live, so this
is super. So I'm the first live person.
No, we've tried it a few times, but the whole setup is a little bit wonky. So we'll start over, and that way we can just make a nice cut, and then whoever jumped on this can do it. All right.
Deal.
So Seth Tower Hurd, welcome to the podcast.
You. Yeah.
So you are an author on Substack, and I get your newsletter twice a week. There's only you and one other person that I read their newsletters. First, what is Substack, and why do you put what you put on there?
Yeah, I think that every few years you see where people are writing move. Do you remember, I would say 2009 to 2012, everybody had a blog? Mm-hmm. Everybody had a blog. And then what happened, it just sort of started to burn because, first of all, Google, to get a little technical for if you're into stuff like this, Google Reader went away. So it used to be that people got traffic to their blog off of Google Reader. When that went away, when there was a tool that you could follow all kinds of blogs and sort of get it like you get a social media feed, people kind of just quit blogging, and then podcasting was starting to rise, and I would say that's right when Twitter started to get really big, and so people transferred kind of to other places. During all that time, I wasn't ever writing for myself. I was actually writing for magazines, and that came to an end, which let me get back to right after the technical aspect of this. And as my magazine career was actually sort of wrapping up, if you will, newsletters were starting to rise. And what we were seeing is that, you can consume a lot of YouTube, you can consume a lot of podcasts, but as people started consuming tons and tons of those, there sort of became this resurgence for you know what, I actually want to read something once in a while.
Oh, yeah, I'm totally there, because there's sometimes when you're just I want to be the gauge of how fast I read this and how much fidelity I get out of this. So, but it's not very often. I don't want to sit down and read all the time.
Yeah. And so, I sort of stumbled on this by accident. I thought I was done. I was never a full-time journalist. That's the main thing I was doing. But I was always, a paid writer, if you will. My career was in radio and TV and then in business. But I always kept writing, kept publishing in some way. I'm actually not going to mention the publication because I don't want to go down the road of starting a social media fight or anything. But I'd written for a magazine for 13 years that I think maxed out around somewhere between 2 and 7 million hits a month, several 100,000 print copies kind of at their heyday and everything. And somebody I had worked with there got promoted to managing editor who clearly had a beef with me. I guess because of my views or my writing style or whatever. This person was a pretty avid socialist and really put that out a lot on social media and everything. And so this editor couldn't fire me. But what happened was that it wasn't political content. It was actually pop culture content. The editor kept, reassigning, nitpicking, double assigning me with somebody else and being oh, whoops, I can't believe that I assigned 2 people to this, not responding to emails. So after 13 years, I went through a period of 3 or 4 months where I could not get one thing published. And then I just was okay, I can just try to throw a fit here, or I can just call it. And it felt like that was a good long run. And I thought that I was done. The other thing that happened there was that I had this major, and this is going to dip a little bit into conspiracy theory, but I've got some backing here. I had a major breakthrough in my writing career, which is I got picked up as a certified Rotten Tomatoes critic. And so I was supposed to be one of the starred ones because I was with a bigger publication. It wasn't and nothing against this if you're listening and you're a writer for a Wichita paper, but it wasn't like the Wichita, Kansas newspaper. It was a pretty big outlet. So I got the acceptance letter that I was going to get it. And then I emailed and tried to get that to go through for a year. And for a year, they kept messing with me, not giving me, the keys, so to speak, to where I could upload my reviews. And eventually I realized it was because, I was moderately politically conservative in a space where that's not okay, which is film critic work. On the political compass test.
Really? So you think conservative like media people, or not media people reviewing movies don't get a showing?
Okay, so I will tell you what I heard from multiple PR people in Hollywood. Okay. And I was getting opportunities to interview. I mean, I've interviewed Oscar winners. I was getting offers to fly out to interview Christian Bale. I was not a minor player in this game. And some PR folks that worked in film and TV that had known me for years said, absolutely, they are, they're absolutely blocking you. And Rotten Tomatoes, essentially wants movie reviews to go a certain way. I mean, to take a very neutral example, you pretty much can't get a bad review if it's a Marvel movie. You can't. And these really big Oscar winners, you can't get a bad review even though people don't like them. I actually mentioned recently in one of my Substacks that the last 3 years, the Best Picture winner, less than 1.5% of the population has actually seen the Best Picture Oscar-winning movie in theaters.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, because I ran the numbers on the, I averaged $12 a ticket, and then what the box office did, and how many people are actually seeing this. And so if you take that compared to Return of the King won in 2003, Rocky won Best Picture back in the day, there clearly is a whole little network of people that are trying to push certain kinds of movies and not push other kinds of movies. And because I had a few things out there that touched on politics, was never a political writer, I clearly was not going to be allowed into the club. And I figured that out, and I was able to pass that knowledge along. I've got a friend now that is at one of the, I'll just say that he's at one of the largest magazines in the country. And he came to me privately because we wrote for the same magazine. And he said, I feel like, we're not in the political space, but we're pushing politics really hard. Do you think I should speak up? What's my place on this? And he said, I'm a fairly moderate conservative. I voted for Republicans. I voted for Democrats. And I just told him, dude, based on what happened to me with Rotten Tomatoes, you either need to switch careers or you need to bury that opinion really deep and see where you can have some very mild influence. And you just need to make peace with that. Because I essentially lost my, quote unquote, movie writing career over it.
And so once you didn't have this, how do you somehow maneuver your way to getting into Substack and building up your audience there?
Well, I took a couple years off, and I just thought that part of my life was done. We moved to St. Louis. I had become a parent. It was just that's kind of it. And I don't even know what it was. But on my lunch hour one day, I was just it would be kind of cool to do a list email maybe once a week. And I copied some of my contacts out of Gmail, and I just shot out an email to 50 people. Hey, here's a list of something. I'm going to write a list of 5 things. And it wasn't even the format it is now where it's necessarily news. I was just kind of screwing around. I just thought it would be fun to write again. And from there, I was really surprised at how much people liked it. And then, it became a thing when I realized that people were reading every single one of these. And I just couldn't believe it, because in the corporate world, if 27% of people open an email, you're like, oh my gosh. And I started to see the numbers, and that, that people really cared about this. And I was like, I should keep doing it. And from there, I expanded it to, because I previously worked in pop culture. I do hard news on Tuesdays, pop culture on Fridays, and I have, with the exception of taking a week off for vacation for the last 2 years, every Tuesday and Friday I put something out.
So your Tuesday newsletter is usually about like the news and things that are going on. I find it really interesting because I used to believe that, like, in order to be a good citizen, I genuinely believe this, like a patriot, a person that was a good American, knew what was going on in the news all around the world.
Yeah.
And now I don't have that opinion at all. Like it's much more slimmed back because I realized, like, really I was caught up in a soap opera that I have as much control over the weather as I have on that. So I've kind of come full circle. I went from being like international relations, all of these things, reading the New York Times, thinking you needed to stay up on all the big publications. And now, unless somebody sends me a post-paywalled article, I don't say anything at all.
Okay. So just curious there, what formed that in you? What made you, because most people are not that. Most people are not that interested in, tensions between India and China right now.
Well, I think like I was living on the East Coast. I was hanging out with a lot of people that were Peace Corps, World Bank, diplomacy world people. And I think like that's kind of the mentality that's taught in colleges. You should know about what's going on in the wider world, more important than when your city council meets or when leaf pickup day is, right? Because people are so transient. It's like, it's not worth the time, energy investment for me to learn this little microcosm. I might move in a year or two. So why would I put all that effort in? And I can feel so much more important if I know about what's going on in the wider world. But my whole point about this is I abstained from all this stuff until I came across your blog, because I felt like it was a good way to get a broad spectrum of things. I often see things that I'm like, I don't agree with that, but like not in the sense that I disagree with your assessment of it. More just like, I don't even know. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it really pushes the envelope. So how do you decide what gets into that Tuesday all about the media article?
Well, you're not supposed to agree with all of it or like it or anything. What's been very surprising to me, and like nobody's more surprised than I am that this works. It's been that the readership, I did a poll last Christmas, and it's about a 60-40 split politically, right and left. Okay. And there actually aren't a lot of people who consider themselves like very far right. But there are people who consider themselves very far left that read it, which, given that I'm, moderately to the right, that was surprising that I reached that far over. And what I'm looking for is like the stuff that actually matters. So much of, you just called it a soap opera. So much of the news cycle right now is more or less the same as like early to mid 2000s reality TV. It's like, well, this person said this.
Yeah, that's exactly. It looks like the real world, right?
Cut to commercial break.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I try to ignore all that stuff and just say like, so what's really happening? I don't even know, because I consume news to write the newsletter, and then I'm pretty much done. I try to stop after that. So I don't know how big of a story it is that that there's talk of minting a $1 trillion coin to raise the debt ceiling. If that gets headlines, it's because it's kind of novel. Like, oh, look at this $1 trillion piece of money. As if you could spend it or do anything with it, right? It's a way to get around the debt ceiling. The national budget and how much we're getting hit by inflation and the supply chain stuff that you've been sort of aggregating on Twitter, people sending in, that's a really big deal. And it's like, it's not a headline.
Yeah, that's been the most surprising thing. And I think it's fundamentally, it's the fact that most people in the United States don't understand what inflation is. If you understand it, you're suddenly evaporated from that group. You know what it is. You can be afraid of it. You can see how it plays out. But if you don't really understand what inflation is, like, then all these supply chain issues, all the prices that are going wildly up, or the unavailability of rent in a place where it's like, yeah, but there's There's, I have all this money in my bank account that I've never had, and I still can't rent. Like, it seems like the hand of God. It doesn't seem like an inevitability. And that's like the weirdest thing in the world once you understand how inflation works, because you're like, well, of course this was going to happen. But when you talk to people that don't think it's going to happen, they genuinely don't understand how inflation works.
Yeah. Well, we heard a lot, I think, at the start of the COVID lockdowns of like, oh, well, the government needs to pay people to stay home so this disease will go away. A year and a half later, we just drove up to Peoria last weekend for a family thing. I stopped at a gas station for water. There was no bottled water. None. Went to the gas station across the street. I asked. She said, well, I've got some in the back. I'll sell you one. I was like, well, my daughter was asleep in the car seat. But I was like, my wife and I are both thirsty. Can I have two? No. You cannot have 2 bottles of water. I mean, that's developing nation stuff right there. And that's not a one-off. Like you're starting to see shelves that are just like big stores that just have open shelves, and you don't normally see that.
My impression is that most people aren't going to big stores, right? We've become so used to ordering our groceries and Amazon online that when you think about like, are the shelves at Target full or not? I don't know, right? If I go on Amazon and I say, hey, I'm looking for some pens, then they're only going to show me the full shelves of pens. They're not going to show me the shelves that are empty, that don't have the pens in that they normally would. And so I think people have been lulled into this sense of not really understanding just how behind we are even in regular retail goods, let alone things that are way harder to manufacture and have a much bigger impact. Things like tractor tires or the chips in trucks, things like that.
Yeah, and that stuff's all going to filter down. I would say buy some extra dog food, buy some extra paper towels. If you're listening to this right now, I mean, the supply chain will catch back up, but you don't want to be, if there's a few essentials you could keep around your house, now would be a good time to do it. Getting back to that question of what goes in, to me, it is sort of like like in the corporate world, it's like your priorities matrix. It's like what's important versus what's urgent. And I wrote about this at, 4:45, 5 a.m. Yesterday morning, but the using whips on Haitian immigrants who'd crossed the border, refugees who crossed the border, I looked at that, and anybody that's ever been around horses, like immediately like, oh my gosh, that's clearly split reins to a horse. It's connected to the bridle of the horse. That's how you drive the horse, and so that's a journalism error. What was the most amazing to me was that USA Today ran a piece that said we're whipping Haitian refugees and it's not okay. And then in the first couple paragraphs, it says, according to the El Paso Times, a Border Patrol agent cracked a whip. Okay, so the piece even contradicted itself. And then there was no evidence of whips in the images that were taken. And then it was confirmed Border Patrol agents do not carry whips. People who grew up in town don't know a lot about livestock or about horses, and they didn't understand that those were reins. And so I was just amazed by that, because I would have gotten fired for that. Like my career 15 years ago, as I started out doing some on the ground reporting in Chicago, I would have been done. Like I would have had to go into sales or something else, because if I would have interviewed for another job, why'd you get fired? Oh, I said somebody got whipped, but there was no like whip present in this law enforcement group. We're not going to hire you. You're done. Now you can do it at the highest level, and they don't even print retractions. They just change the story.
And why do you think that is? What changed in the media that made that what was once unacceptable acceptable?
I think there's a few things going on. I think the first one is that honestly, they just don't have budgets. There's just less people working. There's less people fact checking. There's less people writing. They're under tremendous pressure to produce things fast, because as much as they don't want to admit it, the thing that's hurting big media the most is shows like this. It's independent Substacks like I do. It's the fact that now there's people are giving, instead of getting a subscription to the New York Times or the Washington Post, they're actually, donating $5 a month to 3 or 4 different YouTubers. And that's where that money's going. So not only is like, at first it was like, oh, well, nobody's paying for news. Now they're paying for news. It's that there's less trust in the big institutions. And so people trust individuals more. So, they're essentially kicking in tips, $5 here, $10 there, which used to go to traditional news subscriptions. And the more that big news outlets do things like I just talked about, and the more that they engage in like frantic coverage that's not fact checked, et cetera, the more that people who are plugged in individuals, like you talked about, that it was important for you to stay up on, stuff in the world, don't trust them because they just keep screwing stuff up, and the cycle continues, right? The more they screw stuff up, the less people want to give them money, and the more likely they are to give it to an independent Substack or an independent YouTuber. Past that, you see people like Barry Weiss, who was the opinions editor at the New York Times, just say, this is corrupt, it's garbage, I'm out. And she walked away last year. I think she's one of the best writers out there, period. She's a, pretty far left, kind of theater nerd type. She uttered the phrase abolish the Second Amendment on Joe Rogan's podcast, but she's a really good journalist. And so where she and I may disagree on, kind of individual issues, I have tremendous respect for the fact that she's a journalist when other people are not journalists.
Well, she was the one that had an article about Jordan Peterson that wasn't, completely insane. And she was the first one after he had just gotten this onslaught, at one after another. And she was working for the Times, right?
Yeah.
And I think she referred to him. Well, that article was just like such an explosion in that world, because the motion of the ocean had already gone in one direction, which was Jordan Peterson is evil, and the things he's saying are misogynistic, and you just got to get rid of him. And she said something different, and I imagine her life had to be flipped completely upside down when she did that.
Yeah. Well, this actually goes back to something that happened about 10 years ago that I think is one of the biggest stories of this century that nobody paid attention to. There was a scandal called the Journo lists. And so what this was all these journalists at the different big outlets in New York and Washington, D.C., they were all like WhatsApp and group texts and stuff talking about how essentially they should have the same opinions, how they were going to throw stories towards certain things. It was Ezra Klein that was quarterbacking this thing, who since then I actually think has gone on to do some pretty good work. But if you think about the fact that these are supposed to be like independent voices that are, following the truth no matter where it leads, like the old school, like if your mother says she loves you, check it out type of thing. So this was 10 years ago that we saw all these journalists essentially, give up on what they believed in and like to be a part of a club. And that's the biggest thing I see in the media right now, having worked in it, having been in, like some of the, all the bigger kind of news stations in Chicago, TV and radio and morning shows and everything, is unfortunately a lot of people go into it not just as a job or as a calling, but to have an identity as a journalist, as a media person. And that tends to skew the way they do their work, because they don't just want to do a good job. They want to feel special. They want to feel like they are somebody.
It was so a few years ago, I was invited to MIT. They have this program out there called the Knight Science Fellows, and that's where they teach journalists. They can audit any class they want at MIT or Harvard. That's at the graduate level, and it's journalists there for a year. So they don't even have to write a single story. They just get to take these scientific classes. And so they'd be from Outside Magazine. There was somebody from the Wall Street Journal. And, all these big publications out there, Washington Post. And so I gave a lecture there, and it was awesome because they were radically underestimating. They were like, oh, the director of millennial engagement is going to be here. This is hilarious, right? And so we ended up having like a really good talk. It was like something they didn't expect. And afterwards we went out to dinner. Now, these people have taken me out to, this is Cambridge. So I'm having like one of the nicest dinners I've ever been at. They are ordering, $200 bottles of wine. They have food that's like a little plate with just like little tiny things on it that are, this is probably, an $80 meal or something like that. Yep. And they are all there telling me, like, yeah, we understand that you're growing food more bountifully than we ever have before, but the world is in an awful place. It keeps getting worse. And yeah, Steven Pinker, I know he's written like some good stuff, but he's wrong because basically, and it was just like 1,000 reasons why we're headed to the abyss. And I was like, if all of the journalists at the top science program at MIT that are drinking $200 bottles of wine and eating some of the finest meals that you can have in Western civilization believe that the world is getting worse, then what the fuck is their writing going to talk about, right? Like these are going to be insane people, right? These are people not living in reality.
Yeah. And you see that a lot where a lot of journalists were saying that like, oh, we're risking our lives, particularly during the Trump era. And both, I will say, the last three presidents have all had their moments of being hostile towards journalists. People forget that Obama was fairly hostile at moments because he was so diplomatic for so much of his presidency. Obviously, Trump just trumped all over Trump land when he was talking to journalists. And Biden will just ignore questions, walk out, turn his mic off, say things like, my patience is wearing thin, stuff like that. And there is this sense that, like, not only are we the good guys, but we're the martyrs. And then I look at that compared to...
Yeah, that's right. We're the ones putting ourselves in danger here to get you the story that we already created before we ever walked in the room.
Yeah. And, I forget her name, but some of the best journalism I've seen in a year was that CNN female reporter who stayed on the ground in Afghanistan as things were going to hell. And I can't think of her name, but she was putting herself in positions where she could have died to tell the stories of people who were dying. And, she got out right there at the end, a tremendous, tremendous person in the journalism industry. And I look at that and I'm just like, okay, so if you want to be like a quote unquote martyr, like go cover a war zone. I mean, there are wars.
That's what makes what Glenn Greenwald is doing.
Yeah.
That's so interesting to me. So when I first heard Glenn Greenwald, I was working at a radio station called KZYX and Z. This is in like Northern California, Mendocino. So like the people in Mendocino think the people in Berkeley are too conservative, so they move up there, right? So I was driving to work at this community public radio station, and Glenn Greenwald would come on a show with Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah.
So like definitely left, right? And then he helps out with the Snowden papers, like helps him get that stuff published. And then, at the height of the cultural like wave crashing onto society, he switches teams and says, my news outlet, which has always been left, has been completely hijacked. We've left all of our principles. And so now I'm going to the other side. What's your take on what Glenn Greenwald's done and is doing?
You know what? I think that if you zoom out, because I'm always looking for not individual stories, but patterns. I would say that Matt, if you look at, there's like almost a trio there. Matt Taibbi, formerly of Rolling Stone, Barry Weiss, formerly of the New York Times, and then Glenn Greenwald, who have all done the same thing, that have all been these essentially like internal whistleblowers to say, the left have lost their minds. The stuff that we always have believed in is gone. And all three of them have basically said, I don't care if nobody else follows me. Like, I'm going to plant my flag in the ground right here, and I'm not going to move. And to me, they're three of the most important voices in the United States. What I think is so fascinating about what the political left is doing right now, you and I are very close to the same age, if not exactly the same age. And what I see on the kind of more fringes of the political left that's very popular right now is almost exactly what Jerry Falwell's moral majority was, from a religious standpoint, only now it's on the other side. And it's so weird to me that happened. Like, it's the same
Jerry
thing.
Falwell would be a guy that I remember his name. I remember he was like very like considered evil conservative.
Yeah.
But so make it more specific.
Okay.
What do you mean?
Yeah. Let me narrow that down. So Jerry Falwell did a thing called the moral majority, where it's like, if you were a Protestant evangelical Christian, you have to vote this way. It was about like kind of solidarity and power, if you will, right? And it got really weird. I mean, I was a really young kid, but there's some really good books you can read about this. There's one called Jesus and John Wayne. Don't agree with everything in it, but it's a fascinating take on this time. And so what it was very much demonizing the other side politically, without holding to any kind of standards. And you can see that with the left's treatment of, or the right's treatment of Bill Clinton, and then Donald Trump over infidelity. There's some space between those two things. And it was Bill Clinton is the worst person ever in the world for infidelity. He is the devil incarnate. And then, Trump, who's been, married 3 times and doesn't have the best record with, with maintaining marriage vows traditionally. It was, he's learned from his past and that type of thing. So it was just rank hypocrisy in whatever it was. It was the Christian thing, the moral thing, the right thing is to line up with the political right, no matter what. We are now seeing the same thing where it is a religious fervor to where there's like no reason around a lot of this stuff, no logic, but we have to line up. You saw that in both the Emmys and the Met Gala to where just the optics of it, the wait staff were masked, the celebrities were not. The mayor of San Francisco, condemned people for going to outdoor music festivals and then, was seen like maskless at, I don't know if that was like a blues concert or something like that. And she just said everybody shouldn't basically kill my buzz. It was, I was feeling the spirit or something like that when she was like, at this concert. And she can't even compute that, like, it's like, not even wrong to her that the rules are for everybody else, not the specials. You saw this with Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot getting her hair done while, everybody else was locked down, and couldn't go anywhere. And she just said, well, I take my personal hygiene very seriously and I'm the face of this city. So I get a haircut, you don't. And it doesn't even compute, not necessarily for the people doing this, but for a lot of their acolytes, their followers, their disciples, that this is wrong. That we can't have different rules for different people in democracy.
And why not? Like I'm always like really suspicious of my own delusions that I get from propaganda, right?
Yeah.
So I like to differentiate between propaganda and education. Education is how to think, propaganda is what to think. And I got to tell you, when I turn on the news, they're not trying to teach me how to think. They're trying to show me like, hey, this is the way that you should understand that. So when I see that stuff about the haircuts and them, you shouldn't wear masks. Oh, yeah, we should, right? These kind of lies. I think, is it really as bad as it looks? Or am I being hijacked to go down this way and think that the other side are morons and crazy people that can't be trusted under any circumstance? Because if they're really behaving the way that it looks to me through the window of propaganda that I see, then they look insane.
Yeah. I would actually take that back to like the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the Bill of Rights. If you're born here, it doesn't matter if you were born in 1983 or 1997 or 2003 or 2017. You were born into a world with what was supposed to be the same freedom of speech, freedom of movement, all those old school ones, like you can't be forced to, put up a British soldier rent free, all that stuff that was supposed to apply across the board. And, a big part of what I try to avoid is like going into hysterics journalism, because that's all journalism is. But I don't think it's hysterics journalism to say it's very uncomfortable that, essentially the elites, the specials, the famous people now don't have to live like the way everybody else does. And, that's and not even necessarily because it's stupid, which it is, but it's also how you get the French Revolution. It's also how you get people who so overreact that they're willing to become violent and murder people that, that really had nothing to do with the situation.
A couple weeks ago, I was hanging out with some friends in California, and a buddy of mine, a good guy, but he said, I really want to get back to pre-COVID life and everything. There's, it's been terrible, but, I do like the masks being on waiters and people cooking my food, because you don't really want those people breathing on your food. Don't you agree? And I was like, no, man, no, I don't want the masks for anybody. This is like creating a tiered system. And you see it going on right now in the county of St. Louis. I can walk into my favorite restaurant. I don't have to put on a mask. I go walk and sit down at my table, and all around me are waitresses, and I can see back into the kitchen. All those people are shoved into masks. And it's like this performative thing that we're doing that creates two classes of people.
Yeah.
Those that do have to wear the mask and those that don't. And this is not good.
Well, one of those comments that going back to, sort of that attitude of media, being the elites, being the specials, being the martyrs. I was in the WGN newsroom in Chicago. You can see it nationwide on cable, and I was talking to one of the producers, which is kind of what you do when you're in PR while your guest is out there talking to the host. You're trying to build a relationship to get the next person in there, right? And whatever you're doing. And the producer said to me, had no idea how horrible this was. I never would have guessed you're from a farm. You're so well spoken. And like, swap in race there, swap in sexual orientation there. I can't believe that you're literate. I never would have thought that people from group bleep are literate. And that's what concerns me. It's not, kind of the clapback journalism or, whatever it is. It's where we're at right now. And not even necessarily that like this person has to wear a mask and this person doesn't. I worry that kind of hypocrisy will push people who are mentally unstable to commit terrorism, for one thing.
Yeah, I mean, like when you start telling people, I mean, just take the kid in high school, right? That was told all the time, you're a bad kid, you're a bad kid, you're a bad kid. What does he start doing? He starts living up to that ideal because everybody already thinks it. That the floor is always slanted that way. And I think about this in terms of how will you ever reintegrate society back together if you've said those people are dirty and they have to wear a mask and we should be afraid of them. Like, how do you ever get over that? You can't teach that to children and then like 5 years from now be like, no, the dirty people aren't dirty anymore.
Well, when I think to, the era when you and I were kind of in our maybe like prime pop culture years when we had more attention to give to pop culture, when we weren't like exhausted parents. You didn't hear awards shows, sports interviews, post-game interviews and that type of thing. They didn't instantly turn political. Everybody had these common rallying points, and we might vote differently. But we all kind of enjoyed the same stuff. And, we enjoyed the same holidays, the same food. And, there may be cultural differences. But, like, it doesn't matter if you're a Honduran immigrant or, a Swede person of Swedish descent from North Dakota who's very into your heritage, or somebody on the East Coast, or a grandma in Florida, or whatever it is. We all celebrated Thanksgiving, right? I'd love to get your take on this. What is a thing that we now all enjoy that is not politicized?
I mean, so the other day I was talking with my 101-year-old mentor, right?
Yeah.
And I was really worked up about, the potential for booster shots and vaccine passports. And one of the things that he said to me during this was, Vance, whatever the past was, we're not going back to that.
Yeah.
The makeup and the decisions and the who's in charge, it's going to be different. Maybe that'll be you and the people you want to be in charge, and maybe it won't. But it is going to change in a big way. And like the earlier you come to that realization, then the more you can build in that future area. And that really hit me like a ton of bricks, right? Because I don't think of myself as a conservative in the sense of me being like, I don't want to change, right? I don't want to update society. I'm a conservative in the sense of like where I'm like, whoa, let's change at some moderated pace. But when you do finally come to the full conclusion that shit is about to change in some big way.
Yeah.
Well, then I start saying like, maybe I should be having better conversations about where things are going. But it seems so chaotic to me that in many regards, I don't know.
Well, going back to the first thing you said, that you are a lot more concerned with like being local. I can't control the fact that for the last 30 years, Congress has pretty much like defaulted on their duties. Congress just sort of recommends a budget. Their legislation is not driven out of Congress. There's a reason you see more protests in front of the Supreme Court than in front of the Capitol, and it's because the Supreme Court has a lot more say over laws than Congress does. And we're in this system now where you're essentially, even if you're a senator, you're almost continually campaigning, right? You're not really doing your job. And that means that the Supreme Court and the president have tons of power. And you saw it with the Trump-Biden transition. Biden came in and just torched everything Trump touched, even things that you just can't imagine why, that was burned up other than it was a Trump thing. Trump had, issued an executive memo to build federal buildings in the classical style, as opposed to just the disgusting like 70s brutalism that just ruins like skylines and cities. Like it's gross. And Biden just torched that because that was a Trump thing. And, whenever power flips over again, you're going to see that again. I don't want to live in like, we had a revolution not to have a king. I don't think having a shorter term monarch is great. My seventh great grandfather died as a colonel in the American Revolution. I don't think it was for shorter term kings. I think it was for no king. I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to calm society down, but I do know how to put out 10 stories a week where people from all walks of life that have very different opinions can say, you know what, we can at least talk about these same things. Because if you split up, just pick anything, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, those are now contentious holidays. Baseball, college football, NBA, those are all now highly politicized. Soccer. It's like soccer is like the white liberal sport, NBA is like the young liberal sport. College football is like the rural, kind of, and baseball, kind of the like rural good old boy sport is how it's seen now. The NFL is probably somewhere closer to the left. And I actually think that's a huge deal, that we used to build bonds with neighbors through like civic organizations and through shared experiences. In addition to losing like all of our common pop culture touch points, like all that old school stuff, like the Rotary Club, that we had no idea how much it was holding society together by holding our local communities together, until like that nobody cares about that stuff anymore and we all hate each other.
And you have to wonder, is this tumult that you're going through just the very fact that the bonds are breaking up because the old level of stability, the way that people were comprised together, needed to be different, and now a new phase, you hit a new transition, you've got to heat those things up and things break apart. I don't normally take this position, but I think it's an interesting one to consider with somebody like you. Like, so how long will college football be that? Is that a permanent thing? Does that mean that football eventually goes away? Does it mean because they say, oh, it's too dangerous with concussions? Or
I think it does football go away. I think that came and went. If we were going to stop watching it, this gets into something else. The people who were saying they were going to stop watching college football in the NFL because it was too dangerous or whatever, that didn't match up with the ratings at all. But what did match up with the ratings was that when the NFL started getting highly politicized, the ratings did dip, and you saw all these people go over to the very short-lived XFL, because that was and it was kind of novelty football in a way, but it wasn't like silly football like it was when they first tried to launch the league. It was more sports-oriented, and it was just sports. That was it. I think the other thing that you're seeing on the sports thing is the rise of the UFC being just absolutely huge from a very fringe thing. And again, I think that goes back to people trust individuals more than organizations. And that's an individual sport. So you don't have to worry about the, whatever weird thing that the team said on social media. Or whatever.
I mean, men's UFC, there's no real way to cheat in there. You get into a ring in an octagon with a person, and you either beat the hell out of him or he beats the hell out of you. And it doesn't matter whether there has to be, inclusion or, I mean, anyone is welcome inside
anybody.
the
And
octagon.
you see all kind, from the first major LGBT sports champ in America being, the female UFC champ, to a couple fighters who have like gone and taken their Colby Covington took his belt to President Trump's office, and everybody's kind of cool. Actually, that is one where everybody's kind of cool and is cool with everybody's opinions and everything. Getting back to that question of like how much do things have to heat up before they break apart, I don't want to believe the answer that I'm giving you, but from what I can tell, people calm down when the consequences of their anger, of their hatred, is so horrific that they actually see it. So if you look back at World War I, like you got all these guys that are like ready to go. It's exciting. There's a book that's titled Before the Leaves Fall, because they thought they were going to go become men. And what happened was that they went, and it was the most horrific war, you know, that we can imagine. I mean, chemical warfare, you know, people just piled up in trenches, and then disease from that spreading. And then what happened is all those vets came home and said, don't do it. Don't go to war. Don't glorify this. And then we learned the lesson too much that way and allowed Hitler to rise to power because Europe and the United States were so not wanting to get into conflict again that we let like the most evil person ever get into power, right? Unfortunately, I think what's going to happen one way or another is that people will probably remain angry until something happens that makes them realize that it's not everybody else. If I continue to believe this, horrible things will happen in the world. I got that earlier because part of my family that married into my very large farming family, there was a population of Laotian refugees that were sponsored by local churches. I grew up with people who watched people beheaded in a civil war. There was a guy that is from the county I grew up in that his relatives sponsored him out of Auschwitz very early on when you could actually pay a ransom to get your relatives out. You know, I remember being 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old kid, him telling me about the concentration camps, showing me the tattoo on his arm. So I've never been this person. I think that people just like these, you have these irrational thoughts on World War I that like we're going to go become men, that, you know, those conservatives, those liberals are so stupid that we're going to have to kill some of them, you know, to like get things back to normal so they can learn their lesson. And the only way that you can talk like that and you can think like that, because there's been this conversation about like American Civil War for, you know, last 6 years or so. The only way you can think that or utter those words is because you are completely ignorant to what those words mean.
Yeah, or to think of them as like, this will somehow be the easier path than figuring it out with what we have right here, right?
Yeah.
Like that when I lived in Kenya, like the real experience that you get from that is, okay, you can do what you want in Kenya. Like there's very few people around. I mean, there's a lot of social pressure, right? But you can do what you want because there's no police there. But then you see what it's like when people live and they're afraid. Then you see like how mobs handle, justice. And I think about like the idea of, defund the police is kind of come and gone. And I wonder what the next one will be. But I do think we're still just as primed as we were for another George Floyd incident to go off in any direction.
Yeah.
And I think that there are people that the reason they're excited about it is because, just like we were talking about in the beginning, it's a continuation of the opera, the soap opera that they've been watching, as opposed to understanding like, no, those are real stores that burned down. No, those are real truckers that were pulled out of their truck and beaten, right? Like,
yeah.
These are real things.
Well, you know, if I had to do over again, I would have done some on the ground reporting during the riots in St. Louis. I drove around some, and what I saw, because people were congregating in Ferguson again, I saw white kids in very expensive SUVs with out-of-state plates that gathered into a very big crowd, and those mobs burned down local black businesses that had just rebuilt from the violence a few years ago, that burned down a police station that has, from what people in Ferguson have told me, has done a complete 180. Again, I'm just going off of what a couple of residents have told me. Okay. Complete 180. That community is way better off than when it first made the news. And you have rich white kids who don't even live in Missouri who came and were a part of the crowd. I can't tell you who did the burning, but were a part of the crowd that burned it down.
You know, like just even the way you're describing it there. I mean, I understand why you are, but it would have been so weird when we were kids to have described the race of people that were doing things, or to talk about white kids doing something or black kids doing something. That would have been so weird that like everybody would have looked at you and been like, what's up with that dude? Like, why does he keep referencing that? And now it's become a normal part of the way that people like feel like you have to describe things.
Yeah. That's weird that like, as much as I don't want to be part of that world, that's now the language that all of us are in, right? Like we've we've all picked that up.
The other thing that's weird that's changed is, there was a time there where everyone associated St. Louis with riots and like horrible race issues. And now maybe they still do. I don't really know. But there's been so many other places that have had so many conflicts that, like, I don't know, do you think people would recall Ferguson off the top of their head and then right now?
I've tried to trace this because I did some writing about how every social movement goes through the same arc, right? And as somebody who tries to have sane conversations, when somebody says, something like, I support Black Lives Matter, my question is not, what do you mean, but when do you mean? Because in 2015, when you saw some of the stuff that was happening at Mizzou is actually where it really started to pop off of the Mizzou football team. And then you had I believe it was Trayvon Martin, who was like a 12-year-old who was shot in Ohio. And then you had the guy that was the neighborhood watch guy that wound up shooting Trayvon. Wait, no, I got those mixed up. But you know what I'm talking about.
This is exactly the point, right?
Yeah, this is exactly the point.
Those were things that were so clear in our minds that now are a distant memory.
Yeah, and so to me, even Black Lives Matter, I think, is actually something we don't talk about a lot anymore. I think the fact that some of the voices at the top came out as open communists, and then one of them bought like $7 million of real estate and is living in an all-white, predominantly white subdivision in this mansion, really started to that was just the arc of that social movement, right? I don't know what's going to happen after that, but I don't know that out of all of them that people are really going to remember St. Louis. If you say Ferguson, they're going to remember something happened in Ferguson, but things have been so topsy-turvy that I think that what's happened in Portland and Seattle with the ongoing riots, 100 nights of riots in a row and that type of thing, that the rise of Antifa and that type of thing has really taken the heat off of where we live.
So the other part of your newsletter that you send out on Fridays is the culture fashion layer, kind of the what's going on in everything from movies to music. How do you curate that?
So what I'm always looking for is what's going on bigger. So this is not my original thought. This is actually one of my mentors who's a very high level consultant that told me about The Walking Dead. He said that came out after the War on Terror. And after so what happened was you had these hijackers in 9/11. They were living among us, and then all of a sudden they transformed into something else and killed a bunch of Americans. And The Walking Dead, even though they didn't mean to, made a show with that theme.
That's very interesting.
And so I'm looking for the fact that people can't help but write about the time that they're living in. And actually, this is something I'm close to writing about. But a pop artist named Halsey came out with an album a couple of weeks ago titled "If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power." And what I actually think we're seeing that's a connection between pop culture and these social movements, and actually a predominant religious movement, is that, if you look at Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo, kind of the two big, two of the biggest writers right now, right? White
on
Fragility,
critical race theory.
on critical race theory, and Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. Essentially, that is all a conversation about power. Ibram has a line that a lot of people know, which is it's something like the cure for injustice yesterday is injustice today, something like that. Like we need to flip the script. And to me, that is the same thing as that album title. If I can't have love, I want power. And at the same time, I would actually argue that the most predominant religious system in the United States now is actually old school paganism. Barnes and Noble in Chicago has a bigger witchcraft section than they have philosophy section.
Dude, you're speaking my language here because, and I have a working hypothesis in this. So whenever we bring over like a babysitter that's going to, be here for a couple of weeks, we always interview them. And one of the things that they kept bringing up, now I didn't ask them, I didn't know anything at all about this, would be astrology. They'd be like, oh, I'm a Sagittarius. And, when we watch over a Leo, that's, good. And I looked up, Violet's birthday and I know exactly the moon was rising. And so this happened a couple of times. And so I started being like, you know what, I'm going to start asking them. And so I do. And every single college age to 34-year-old woman that I've met in the last I don't know, 12 months. They're
Yeah.
all super into astrology. Every single one of them.
I would say that connects pop culture and then some of the more academic writing that's highly controversial. It's all the same thing. Here's what concerns me about that. I'm a committed Christian. I would actually say that it's a fairly religious experience for me to write the 5, because even though I never mention my belief, it is rooted in the fact that I believe that putting truth out in the world is part of the mission that is in front of me. But I understand that I live in a world with all kinds of beliefs. When my brother was dying of cancer, he had a female Muslim doctor who was, at that point, essentially the most important person in the world outside of my own family. My wife is half Jewish, and obviously part of her family are, Jewish, not just culturally, but like actual, practicing, beliefs. And so, I grew up around a bunch of Buddhists because I grew up around Laotian refugees, and I've worked with a lot of people in India who are practicing Hindus. And I can look at all those things and I can say, okay, so we're probably never going to believe the same thing, but we at least have the same, there's at least some things, kind of the golden rule thing we can like all agree on, like the treat others as you want to be treated. My concern with this rise of witchcraft being the cool thing paired with the political writings and actually paired with journalists even thinking they're special is that when everything is about power, then you can justify anything and you can get into some really weird stuff. This YouTuber Instagrammer who, they unfortunately just found her body in Wyoming. There was a really viral tweet that people were agreeing with that said, I think she was strangled because something about astrology, like whatever sign controls the throat. And I bet she was strangled. And this is why she died. And I was like, okay, so imagine like a Muslim tweeting, that girl probably died because she ate pork.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that. Imagine a Christian tweeting that. I bet that girl died because she didn't honor her father and her mother, like in the 10 Commandments. That's so beyond insane. Like it really does concern me. And it goes back to how do we calm society down? I've really, planted my flag around having sane conversations with all different kinds of people. If your worldview is I worship power, I don't know where we go.
The some of the things that come with Christianity being your societal baseline, even if you are not Christian, is just the cultural energy that goes behind that, right? Like not least of which is our judicial system being like, hey, there's a place for forgiveness here. There's a place for mercy here. There's and maybe people would say the reason that the thing is decaying is because you had these ideals and they weren't playing out for certain groups of people. But you have the idea that we don't live in an honor culture. We live in a meritocracy. We live in a culture where you can transcend the problems of your parents, and you don't have to be responsible for those types of things. And when you change belief systems, you don't know what else you're porting along with them. I mean, the ethics smuggling that happens when you just whole cloth take on, whether it's astrology or however you want to define it, witchcraft, whatever. I mean, this sounds like so far beyond what we would like if you and I had been watching a show on open access television. They're like, it's Satan, right? It's the they're devil worshippers. That would be where this goes. How do you know you're not jumping the shark here? Because I'm saying like the babysitters are into astrology, and you're like, I believe witchcraft is on the rise.
No, and I don't think that necessarily people who are like, oh, I find some meaning or some direction in this. I don't think that necessarily makes them bad people. We obviously disagree. There's obviously, to me, that's a massive suspension of logic as to where, I think that there's a pretty easy case for like the universe started somewhere, maybe you're an atheist and that's cool. Or maybe you're just like, well, I'm a person who thinks there was some sort of force that started life, but at some point there was matter. It's the universe is not eternal as far as we can tell. It's going out into space and it's going to die. So if it's going to die, it has an end, it has a beginning. And so I can see how you can get to different religious belief systems there, or even no belief, right? I personally can't see how you get into like this astrology stuff and think that, a girl died because of her sign, and like that's just, I can't wrap my head around it, right? I don't think necessarily that just if that's something you subscribe to, that makes you a bad person. What I am saying is that the ideas that are circulating right now, of everything being a power dynamic, and I believe I was victimized, so I'm going to do whatever I want, take things from people. A lot of the
my victim status gives me certain special rights that aren't afforded to people that were not the same victim as me.
Well, oddly enough, Christianity is the basis for like reparations. I'm sure there are a lot of evangelicals, mainline denominations, Catholics that would say, I don't believe in reparations. And I'm not making an argument for or against that today. That's a complicated subject. But the idea that you can't just kill people and take their stuff, like that started in Israel and went through Athens and became America. Like nobody ever worried about that until the last like 200-300 years, right? Like Genghis Khan was not slashing and burning his way through Russia and Eastern Europe and into the Middle East being like, maybe this isn't cool. Like maybe I should turn around, go home, and like give the gold back and just be like, I'm really sorry, Moscow, that not only did I defeat you, but like I tortured the soldiers who surrendered. That was a fairly new idea that's fairly unique to America, that we would, the Japanese that we interned during World War II, that we would try to make amends there, right? And when we're back to this power-driven paganism, it is an updated version of, it's cool for me to kill you and take your stuff. My wife showed me these Facebook groups, and I can't believe it. There's all these people who are into like crystals now, and there's even like a Christian moms crystals group. I'm like, what the hell? But we're back to like, if you put this crystal like on you when you sleep, you will like make this man fall in love with you, and he won't have any choice in the matter. We're back to just quite literally power dynamics. Like, if you will not of your own free will choose me, I will use magic to override your personhood, which, sorry, it ain't going to work. But the fact that we're back there, I have a hard time figuring out what we do with that to become a society that doesn't want to kill each other, that doesn't hate each other. Because there's a lot of things that you can reconcile. Pure power is not something you can reconcile. Well, I want to kill everybody and take their things. Well, I want to kill you and take your things.
So as you're listening, you're making up your list on Friday.
Yeah.
What is interesting music that would guide people to a better understanding of what's going on in culture right now? Because like, it's hard to find new music unless I just trust the algos like Spotify. But what could I listen to that would give me a good view into like what the young people are thinking these days?
It's so splintered. I have had this conversation. Individual songs pop off, and you see them go viral because like the hook got big on TikTok or something like that. But these common moments that everybody's listening to the same thing, like there's 5 or 6 CDs that if you pick a given 4 years of high school, almost everybody owned. There aren't those albums that people really rally around anymore. There's 3 or 4 artists that can still pull that off. 2 of them are Taylor Swift and Kanye West. A third is probably Adele, that, kind of cross like, generations, and that people really are events. Albums are not events anymore. And man, it's tough for me to say, even though like when I was teaching in Chicago in my early 30s, like I was way more up on hip hop and like what was going on in blogs than even kids that were, that had grown up in the city, that were like plugged in. They're like, how did you know about that before me? I'm like, dude, because I'm checking Twitter, I'm checking blogs and everything. As far as what's popping off, I do think the fact that music and fashion are now in lockstep, that I think that's really interesting. So you're seeing, like, my wife bought me these jeans that are like short at the ankle or whatever, and she's like, you have to wear these now. And I'm like, oh boy. And that she actually did that for a living. So her work as a stylist has been in like Rolling Stone and stuff like that, styling for multi-platinum rock bands. And at the same time that's happening, like you're seeing like the Olivia Rodrigo early 90s like Nirvana, Alanis Morissette thing pop pop off. And so it's interesting to me that everybody's kind of taking the same cues. It's like, oh, well, we're all dressing like friends. Maybe we should not make the next teen pop star Miley Cyrus. Maybe we should make her Alanis Morissette. I think that's fascinating. Man, as far as recommending individual artists.
Have you heard anything from Tom McDonald? Are you familiar with this guy?
I'm trying to figure out if he's any good or not. Because there's individual lines where I'm like, that actually takes some wisdom to find something that everybody was feeling and nobody had said yet. I think that if you look back at Green Day's American Idiot album, kind of when public opinion was starting to turn on particularly the war in Iraq, everybody was feeling it. Nobody put words to it. Tom McDonald has some of those moments, but some of the other stuff, I'm like, just dude, I'm bored.
Yeah, I agree with that. I listened to him. I was sealing my driveway, and I listened to a whole bunch of him. And I really kind of came to the conclusion, like, every once in a while he has a line that I'm like, oh, man, I wish I would have thought of that. And then there's a whole bunch of it that I'm like, I don't know, is like, this just doesn't speak to me at all. But I'm also, 40 years old sealing my driveway, right? Like, I'm not...
Yeah, and I actually think that, as far as what do I kind of see as the future, I would actually argue he's probably one of, from what I know about the music industry, he's probably one of the 10 or so highest grossing artists of 2021.
I believe
just because
that.
Nobody toured.
Yeah.
He puts out singles and makes you buy his CDs, and people see him as a part of their identity. Going back to like the elitists of journalism, the weirdest thing ever, like, the Hollywood actors that are sort of collaborating with like the East Coast journalists that are collaborating with the Democratic Party somehow made being a Republican punk rock.
Yeah, isn't that the weirdest thing? I mean, like, you saw that happen when Milo Yiannopoulos was coming up, right? It started to be that these like normally Wall Street frat boy kind of thing all of a sudden started carrying a gay man on a throne to go give a speech
at a straight pride parade,
right? And then like, yeah, that's right. And then having that come, really all the way to like the college dudes that are, cooler guys are, I think, conservative.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about kind of pairing what's cool with music right now with what's happening with like the kids. One thing that's interesting about the kids is they no longer want their driver's license. You're seeing this trend up of high school kids don't want a driver's license. And I think that's splitting between this traditional teenage rebellion, I'm going to do my own thing, going to be my own person, to like, I feel microaggressed. I don't want to drive. And that's going to split into two camps as far as what the kids are into. And you're going to see both a screw you, I don't care, and a more, I think mental health is very important. It got really weird when mainstream pop culture started using mental health as the marketing element for pop music.
Yeah, that is weird. That's super weird. Like how people will be so open about their mental health things and their problems with their fans and how much they need their fans, but like all caged around because I have this mental illness.
Yeah,
feels super bizarre.
Well, it's, you can sort of see lockstep, and we gotta wrap because we both have lives here that we got to get back to, and I certainly don't want to disparage this individual at all, but Demi Lovato, I noticed as the conversation around non-binary identity was coming up, she seemed to pull that out right as she couldn't have a hit single anymore, and she had been in trouble for like bullying a yogurt shop, like, which is a weird flex. She sort of recovered with like, oh, by the way, like, I identify as non-binary now. It's not my job to say whether or not, if you're a person I know in real life, I will address you and be kind to you as you wish to be addressed.
But I take your point. Like, she just brought up a whole bunch of issues that are like, not singing.
Well,
right?
yeah. Same thing you saw with like Kevin Spacey, where it's like, he had sexually abused boys, and he's like, oh, by the way, I'm gay. It's like, well, that's not a hall pass for abusing minors.
So we're gonna leave it there. This will be
worst
fun to bring up again, but we have a hard stop. But it was really fun to finally have you come by. You know
Super
where the
cool,
studio is. We will have you back, and we'll do this again, man.
Yeah, and next time I won't end on.
Well, so let's let you end on how if people wanted to sign up for the newsletter, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, I've actually got two of them now. SethTowerHurd.substack.com is my main one. You're talking about being plugged into where you are locally, and that being the most important thing. Check out that one. You'll also find a link from that one to a new one where I just started a new Substack to report specifically on very, very local corruption that's happening within a couple of miles of my house. So, that'll be fun. I'll just start a
Oh,
war
man.
with,
Get that going and come back on and talk about it on the show.
Okay, we'll do that. All right. Thanks, dude.
Thanks, man.
Dude, that was super.